Across the Atlantic Ocean lies a subtropical oasis that beams of exotic beauty. With its signature pink sand, aqua water, and classic rum swizzle, Bermuda is the gem of the Atlantic. Journey today with the Reinsurance podcast as we head to this island paradise to take part in Bermuda's annual Risk Summit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance podcast here in Bermuda. I am your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose, and delighted to welcome Steve Weinstein here with us today. It's sunny Bermuda.
Great to be with you.
Welcome to the show. We have many possible things to cover with you because you're so involved in the fabric of Bermuda reinsurance and have done all sorts of interesting things over the years. But how about we start right at the beginning? What was your first ever interaction with the world of reinsurance?
I accidentally came to reinsurance, as many people do. So a story, Ben, I sometimes tell, I think there are three principal paths to reinsurance.
Mm-hmm.
If you're my age, your father or your uncle was in it. Or you fall backwards into it, which was my path.
Mm-hmm.
In the most valuable path in some respects, you were born in Bermuda.
But
But as the most exciting and valuable and rewarding career path, perhaps, it's a marvelous industry, but it's an industry that very few people are aware of.
Yeah.
So it does tend to be one of those indirect paths or a relative. But my second professional assignment in life turned out to be a venture round for a Bermuda-based reinsurance company. It was very visceral for me it ended up being so important to my life, the business plan and that mix of business vision and an aspirational vision of wedding innovations in science to financial management for the betterment of communities, businesses, and consumers. Really inspiring. And we were choosing at that time where to locate these companies, that what we call the post-Andrew class.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about at the summit this morning, our success seems inevitable in hindsight because Bermuda has become the world risk capital. But nothing is inevitable. It requires the effort of dedicated leaders and individuals. But Bermuda was the best location to operate and domicile a global financial services B2B company, which is a way to describe reinsurance. So from those early days, some of my early interactions, I typed out the stock certificates for Bermuda reinsurers, and we've moved on from there. But it's been a blessing and a privilege to have Bermuda as a core part of my career and to have lived here for a quarter century now.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think we'd be remiss not to celebrate some of your many hats that you wear and some of your current projects. So obviously, long-time member of RenRe. I think somebody gave me a number the other day, but employee like 37 or something.
We used to be able to tell by the phone number, so something in that range.
Yeah.
So it's been great to see them continue to thrive and to grow. I'm a cheerleader and a supporter, and it's a fantastic franchise.
And then nowadays, working with Itascari on the chair of that, also chair of the Bermuda Business Development Agency, non-exec with BIOS as well. Have I missed anything else? You're a busy man.
I'm failing non-retirement, and I have some other projects in the hopper as well. But maybe I'll chat a bit about BIOS. That when the reinsurers descended upon Bermuda, remember Bermuda invented captive reinsurance. The captive product was invented here. And as we talked a bit about the summit today, the casualty liability crisis, some might say solved, but was certainly mitigated and addressed by big solutions that were domiciled and operated from Bermuda. And that's largely what the ecosystem looked like when Hurricane Andrew hit. And the wave of capital formation, the reestablishment and reinvention and restructuring of the Florida domestic market, but the creation of this modern reinsurance market took place here in Bermuda. The thing that was already here as well and was world-class was BIOS. We're in the process of celebrating the 121st anniversary of BIOS, the Bermuda Institute for Ocean Sciences, which I sometimes say is tied for first. Best ocean research organization in the world, because there are other terrific ones, but BIOS is at that level. But we combine with our fantastic faculty and our legacy, and I'll share one thing in a moment, is our unique location. Bermuda is the best place in the world to study the world's oceans because we're out in the deep ocean. And you can push off from the BIOS dock, go off the edge, as we say, leave the reef, and you're in the ocean in literally moments. There's no opportunity like that. Our reef is very special here, and uniquely, and it's why scientists from Harvard and NYU and the Natural History Organization in the U.S. set up shop here, was to begin taking measurements. But BIOS is also the custodian of the longest, and dare I say, I'm not a scientist and I can rhetoricize a bit, most significant set of climate data in the world, what we now call the Bermuda Atlantic Time Series. So for more than a century, we've been pushing off the sloop from the deck and taking measurements in, roughly speaking, the same place in the mid-Atlantic. And my mental map of early days with some scientists in a dinghy throwing a thermometer off the side.
Yep.
And today our tricked up, fully equipped research vessel takes an immense amount of very sophisticated measurements. But that legacy is the same in what we see in terms of oxygenation of the ocean, temperature. It's very important. And we share that with the global community for free. So really, really proud of BIOS and what it does, and excited now to celebrate the merger of BIOS into Arizona State University, what may be the world's largest research organization. So it's been exciting and rewarding. It expands the scope of opportunity for research share. It expands the scope of opportunity for education of Bermudians from Arizona State, lets them afford opportunities to their students there's no ocean in their desert.
Yeah.
If they're studying marine science, they can get their feet wet as they study. It's been a really wonderful relationship, and we're thrilled to celebrate it. A big celebration coming up in June.
Yeah. And how did you get your involvement with that? I can see there's adjacent relationships to insurance and risk and things, but what was the thing that sort of sparked your interest in your involvement with that? It's an amazing organization.
A piece of history, I think, Jared, that's under recognized to a degree. It was so fun today to bring some of the founding fathers and mothers, parents of our market, the Hall of Fame, and there's a broader Hall of Fame, but to give 5 people a microphone today and relive some of those successes. In the world after Hurricane Andrew, and we covered this a bit, Hurricane Andrew was a shocker. Dozens of companies went bankrupt. It exceeded by a factor of more than 10 estimates of maximal industry loss. People thought, we don't understand hurricanes, and we don't understand tools that might use it. And the modeling industry was extant, but it hadn't really been, in my view, applied in a meaningful way into the industry yet. AIR had launched, but it wasn't deeply incorporated into the business. So it turned out scientists have been studying hurricanes. Like, people had won Nobels for meteorology. And we needed to do is marry those processes and learnings and beliefs into actionable risk management tools. But we also had to convince stakeholders that this thing that was shocking, we understand it better than it seems. So for insurance regulators who protect consumers, what we propose to charge you now is not unfair. It reflects the risk in a reasonable band. It's not too much. And we need to also bring greater comfort to rating agencies and investors. It's not too little. It's a reasonable band to be paid for the risk. And for folks who want to get paid to do that, well, you have your own perspective and your own bias. And to bring peer-reviewed, well-recognized researchers with proper papers to validate those findings was very, very valuable. So we set up at BIO something that we are B2B people, not clever blinders. We called it the Risk Prediction Institute, to enhance our understanding, but also test and validate views. And that role that BIOS played in that was actually extremely important. And we're excited now to relaunch the Risk Prediction Institute, in part to cover the broader set of domain expertise that ASU has. And if I can summarize somewhat loosely, ASU has domain expertise in effectively everything. It is among the largest research organizations in the world. We were tapped out at BIOS in terms of our relevance to the industry, because we do have a reasonably robust understanding of Atlantic hurricanes. But AI, cyber, pandemic, satellite launches, which have spontaneous combustion on return, is not a core competency of our marine research faculty. But we are going to host a Center for Innovation and Technology at BIOS and ASU, and it'll afford a new opportunity for the risk transfer industry to participate and support research that can be actionable into the business. Jared, forgive me, it's a long answer, but that's part of the legacy of, we found this world-class organization here, collaborated and partnered with it, and it's a foundation upon which I hope that we can continue to grow in coming periods.
No, it's a fabulous answer. It's super interesting sort of backstory as well on that.
Yeah, and really exciting, I guess, is yet another chapter in Bermuda's growth story. Right? So we're here at the Bermuda Risk Summit, which is a relatively new thing itself, and that seems to be getting bigger and bigger every year.
Yes.
Where does it stop? Bermuda is in a very specific place on the map, but its role on the map seems to grow bigger every time we see a decade go by.
We chatted a bit today about Bermuda's role in the world. On the one hand, Bermuda is enormously relevant globally, and also given our scale, we cannot be all things to all people. Success in Bermuda, in my opinion, has almost always meant collaboration and partnership, and we tend to build companies and cultures that thrive in collaboration models. So again, best platform in the world to run, capitalize, domicile, and operate global tech-enabled B2B or digital B2C companies. But you're going to execute a broader strategy in collaboration with partners in other markets. I think the most adjacent market to what Bermuda has thrived with is climate finance.
Yeah.
And it's the world's biggest risk. The flip side of that is the world's biggest suite of investment and business opportunities. And that model that we brought to reinsurance, working with local partners on distribution and risk management and solutions and claims, is what we're going to need on climate. And the expertise Bermuda has built up as the capital of hurricane coverage. We've been wrestling with wildfire, but those skills, that expertise, that data will translate well into the emerging world of climate finance. And I think that's a big part of Bermuda's future chapter.
What's made it this incredible melting pot of, you've got professionals who are not just insurance, who are not just legal, who are not just finance and capital. How did it all come together with so many varieties of deep expertise?
Some of it, I think, is the nature of reinsurance, that you're underwriting ideally, and there's some specialty players, but one of the values that the product in the market provides is diversification. So this portfolio approach of we can massively, by pursuing massive diversification by peril, by hazard, by geography, by return period, and make known risks and the unknown risks to some degree more affordable, is the value proposition. So it encourages a Renaissance way of thinking.
Yes.
To know a little bit of dangerous and to be humble. I know something about wildfire, but I want to partner with people who understand it really well. And I know how to address the risks of cyber, a process to understand it better, know what we don't know. So it does create that really interesting global perspective and multi-peril perspective. And as people get deep into it, they open up the next thing. The human beings that moved to Bermuda to write excess of loss, property treaty reinsurance are the same people who created ILS. And they didn't come here explicitly to do that, but they picked up skills and knowledge and saw a market opportunity and migrated there. And I think we'll see people inventing real solutions in climate finance who were accountants or actuaries or risk modelers in wildfire reinsurance.
Well, I think it's really interesting because you've seen this historically in the past with financial hubs, New York and London, and then Asia. You had like Singapore, Hong Kong, and the same thing was happening there. People would descend in there and try to build a financial product for a region. But Bermuda is really unique because it's created the sort of risk center of the world. And that same thing you're saying is happening where, well, I didn't come to create ILS, but I was talking to some colleagues about this thing, and we were wrestling with the complexity or off the backdrop of the creation of captives. Like, you came to solve that problem, but then the collection of those individuals tackling interesting and complex challenges together, like, creates the burgeoning of this like hub for risk, which doesn't exist anywhere in the world the way it exists here, which is super, super interesting.
And you touched upon some of the other hubs, but I personally believe, and I think this will continue to be true even as technology evolves, there's such a benefit to physical proximity and a collaboration culture. And there are times we have another problem to solve together. And an idea occurred to me over caffeinated or adult beverages in the walk over to the offices for the other meeting. And as the Lloyd's marketplace is an early example of that. I think it's an advantage of Singapore, but nothing is as dense as the Bermuda market. It's truly unique, and we're limited by space and by other factors, and by, on the one hand, staying close to our knitting, but growing off of that into the adjacent verticals is where I see this market going.
Yeah. And it's enabled, I guess, going back to the spirit of collaboration, by a very nimble regulatory environment, as I understand it as well.
One of the core competitive advantages that Bermuda has is the independent and robust Bermuda Monetary Authority. And they are simultaneously rigorous and nimble. And they are also focused. To step back, they have enormous headcount per unit of risk, but they don't have enormous headcount on an absolute basis. So we do a known number of things. And they are also not trying to be all things to all people. You can't get every possible license here. Being able to turn you away. But for the things that we identify and that we're trying to do, they'll add bandwidth and processes and integrity and the sandbox testing as they roll things out. So people shouldn't be fooled. They are a rigorous regulator. But they're able to get you answers quickly. Frequently the answer is no. I have heard no from them. What's healthy is it's not no answer for years. That's not going to work, we think, but here's why we think that. And you can try to prove us wrong at least one time, or you can address our comments. So their speed back to, even with an answer other than yes, it's happy to hear. And I've, across my career, which is into its third decade here, it's not true of all regulators. Their feedback has always been logical. I don't always agree with it,
Yeah.
but it's rooted in a set of data and opinions that I can respect, and it lets you respond to it.
Yeah. Well, and that sort of sense of collaboration, again, feels like it's at the core where it's no because of these things, but if you're going away and solving for those things, it could very quickly then become a yes. So, well, those are the concerns that you had, and we've repositioned or restructured or whatever it is. Now they're looking to say yes, but you have to sort of solve for what their concerns may have been,
Yes.
and that collaboration sort of at its core and inherently within that structure feels like it's been a big driver of this growth.
It's a huge driver. And again, and I think our results speak for themselves. The default rate for true third-party Bermuda insurance and reinsurance market participants is 0, right? So there's no other class of financial instruments that can match that. Nothing is tied at 0.
Yeah.
So we are outperforming AAA bonds,
Yeah.
and look, we owe a salute to the BMA. Nimbleness can be heard in some corners in a certain way, but that's matched with a lot of rigor.
Yeah.
And again, it's the resources they bring to bear are more than appropriate for the sectors they permit to be licensed here.
Yeah. And so zooming out almost from Bermuda a little bit to the wider world of risk, I actually, when I first came to Bermuda, it was to partly hear you speaking at Convergence to talk about the protection gap, right? So I was going to ask about the protection gap. I was going to ask a bit more about climate. What do you think the global risk industry still has ahead of it that it hasn't really tackled as much as it could? What are our goals for the next decade?
Well, thank you, and I'm glad. I'm going to assume for the moment you booked a ticket and spent money here in Bermuda to hear me speak at Convergence for the protection gap. So, thank you for that.
Most welcome.
But my thinking continues to evolve, but it's consistent. The most immediate and material, actionable opportunity in front of our sector is to close the protection gap, beginning with the risks. You never understand a risk perfectly, and the conditions that create that risk also continue to evolve. But we have a pretty robust understanding to match capital against risk for known perils, and I include flood there. So the U.S. residential flood is a great opportunity for this industry. If it was easy, we'd all have already done it.
Mm-hmm.
But the quake, wind, flood are risks we've been managing, and we currently address a fraction, literally a small fraction of the economic risk resident with perils that we understand well. So and we have closing the protection gap begins at home, from my perspective, the United States, where the flood take-up rate is something like 9%. And markets that permit consumers to opt out from quake coverage, where it's voluntary, 9%. We should have an aspiration in those economies that a consumer buying coverage for their home, a small business buying protection for their small business, is buying the protection that suits the name on the cover of the policy. If it's homeowners, it covers the home. We're not excluding the core drivers of hazard. If it's a general commercial coverage, it's covering what you're most exposed to.
Yeah.
We also have a protection gap in emerging economies who have these exposures but may not yet have a fully mature risk transfer mechanism. And there are an enormous range of possibilities for us to bring our expertise, our understanding of the risk, and our ability to match capital against it to help those communities be more resilient. So it's exciting, it's good to do. It's also the most attractive economic opportunity in front of us. And then there is the protection gap in terms of emerging hazards. So do we understand every component of where AI can produce loss in the economy perfectly today? Of course we don't. But we also don't perfectly understand hurricanes, and we've learned how to manage that. So our willingness to lean into uncertainty, which is part of the strengths of the sector, and to do something that's valuable while managing our ability to keep our promises. We've been doing this for centuries. We can do it for emerging perils. And I think for young people, for scientists, and this is a great industry to bring your expertise in these areas, whether it's cyber or pandemic. And we have a lot of data about pandemics now. Right? The flip side of that tragic period is an enormous data set.
Yeah.
So we've seen things that worked and things that worked poorly. And to encourage more resilience from the inevitable next pandemic or the things that will go bump in the night from AI, it's the most exciting suite of opportunities because they're also very challenging.
Yeah, yeah. And when you look at we talked before with Karen Clark around the advent or the introduction of models and how like big the market got because of that.
Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. Like closing the protection gap is good for humanity. It's the right thing to do. But it also is good for business because it would triple the size of the insurance market worldwide if you began to truly solve like the big sizable gaps in protection and make it a product that's viable and feasible
Yeah.
for citizens and things. So it has those two sort of complementary benefits that if we lean into that.
I tell young people and students, and it can sound counterintuitive, including investors, the times I felt most proud about what we do is when we were authorizing and paying the claims. It looks like the losses, but when you're helping communities and homes and businesses rebuild, that's the product. And we should aspire to do that on an even greater scale and to help them with the challenge that they're confronting. And it's the rising risks of climate hazard. It's also identity theft and AI and the electronic risks to your business in the digital world we all live in. If it was easy and not challenging, it would come at a commodity price. It's going to be hard to do, but it's going to be immensely gratifying. And I think the ROI on it's going to be terrific.
Yeah, and I think as well to that promise point, if we can leverage technology to reduce the expense of doing the business, which means the premiums to the consumer will come down, but the amount of claims that they receive in return go up as that sort of we shrink that. Like that is us delivering on the promise even more so. So it's a noble sort of ambition.
When I was young, cars in my home country tended to explode on impact and light on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And the industry that had the most to do with making a more resilient auto industry was insurance. We funded the research, we demonstrated the research, we marketed the research. And for consumers, the price of insuring motor has been pretty stable on a post-inflation basis. So people aren't dying in cars as much as they used to, which is terrific. Mm-hmm. And that industry has historically been healthy in the succeeding years. So people are living, the product is affordable. That's a model for us in a range of emerging and known perils.
Yeah. Steve, this has been a truly inspiring conversation, and I very much look forward to having more conversations like this again. Hopefully we'll be back next year and can follow up on the journey to building a better industry together.
It's the most fun and rewarding industry in the world, I think, and there's a lot of great ones, and there's nearly no better place to do it than from Bermuda, again, in a collaboration model. So thank you for having me. Thank you for being here, and look forward to seeing the other podcasts.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Steve.